I specialize in helping people find their own agency. The more that we feel empowered in our own agency within our own personality, the more freeing our life is. If you come in to work with me and you want to be a victim, and it's not going to work, it's the opposite of a victim.
Ryan Holsapple, my brother of another mother. Man, you threw it down at CERS. I have to tell you, so many people came up to me. I can't imagine how many came up to you and said, thank you for having him speak. We had a healing moment. My husband called me. He was watching live stream. There was about 11, 12 stories. I started getting overwhelmed. And for those of you who don't know, at CERS, Ryan threw down a talk on agency. He's a therapist who's been to hell and back with his wife's healthcare, and he's still in the thick of it and smiling and profiling every day about it. And why don't you introduce yourself, tell people what you do and what you talked about at CERS.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So I specialize in helping people find their own agency. And when I was about 19 years old, I met a guy named Dr. Roger Strachan, and he had been hired by my parents to do couples counseling. And that process was very transformative, and I met him, and he did some work with me on a light basis. I had a history of addiction early when I was a teenager, behavioral issues, and I was a wild card for sure. And Roger was the first person I met that didn't pathologize me. So in essence, he didn't look at me and say, wow, you're this disorder and that disorder, and we got to modify your behavior. He looked at me and just laughed and said, wow, like, you're a wild man. And he was able to break it down in a way that nobody else could break it down in terms of who I am. And so what I could see is that certain parts of me had been running my life, and that when I got sober, new parts of me had to come online to save my life. And so this whole story about agency I gave at the conference was really a reiteration of a transformational process I've been doing since I was 16 years old.
Wow.
And so because I was in the trenches dealing with addiction, then meeting Roger, starting therapy, from a young age, I learned a lot about psychology because I had to. And I just happened to love it. It was always natural to me to be into what people were thinking, what people were feeling, how they work. And I, even with my friends when I was a kid, I would always want to listen to what the dynamics are, what's going on. So fast forward, I go to Europa University, do my undergrad, and then I start training seriously with Roger. And Roger has been a clinical psychologist working with clients over 60 years. He's 91 now.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, he will blow your mind. Everyone who's worked with Roger, he will blow your mind because he'll tell you things about yourself. How did you know that? So he's got this knower, but he's also a clinical surgeon. So he can help you break your personality down so you can see like what really makes you go and what really gets you going and where you start struggling internally. And a lot of people don't realize, but anytime you have an internal struggle, that's simply just because there's more than one part of you that's at play. We have different wants and different needs. And so we use this word I for convenience, but really the truth is that there's multiple I's going on and they're within this whole human being that I call Ryan. And we just have a single voice for convenience. So when I was preparing to give that talk on agency, that was the foundation of awareness, is that we have these multiple parts and it's what we do with them that matters. And that's where in his model, he calls it self, soul, spirit, which he's now handed down to me, trained me for 10 years, supervised my work with clients, and then decided to give me his business. Wow. And so Roger, he's like a grandfather. He's like a spiritual father to me. He's done so much for me, saved my life. And what we believe in our model is that we have a soul. We don't believe it's just a term. We don't believe that, it's the result of biochemical process. And we take it literally that there's a such thing as a soul. And that's our consciousness. But we also take it literally that the scientific way in which we can study the world is revealing to us real intangible aspects of our lived world. And they're not mutually exclusive. So, there's a great question, right? How do you get something out of nothing? Do some people decide that it's biochemical random processes that have happened because of physics, and other people said, yeah, that all happens. And there's a creative process that's driving that. You can call it God, you can call it soul, you can call it, we believe spirit and soul are linked. So we have an underlying belief that whatever this thing we call consciousness is, it's fundamental to our shared world. And there's also what one of my favorite theoretical biologists calls enabling constraints. That we have bodies, and those bodies have encoded processes, and those are what allows our consciousness to enact. So imagine if you didn't have a body. The body is the enabling constraint. You got an arm's not a wing. You can do certain things with your arm that you couldn't do if you had a wing, and vice versa. So we believe that our subpersonalities are enabling constraints. These parts of us, whether it be a wonderful physician, a calling that you have, right? I would assume that that's a true part of who you are. Or whether it be a wonderful video audio guy, or whether it be a loving husband, or whether it be an athlete, or whether it be a self-saboteur or a victim or a self-critic. So when I was putting that talk together, understand that my journey was finding my soul, finding my agency in the midst of all these parts. And I have parts of me, and part for people who don't know in that story, I have parts of me that were struggling with my wife being bedbound with severe chronic inflammatory response syndrome and other diagnoses, and me being responsible for all the caregiving for months and months and months at a time, and having to say, okay, so it is what it is. What do I want to do with this? Do I want to let the depressed part of me take over? Because that's a true genetic predisposition. And that's the last thing I'll say about the parts, is that they're predispositions. We all inherit different predispositions, and they're probabilistic, not deterministic. So leading behavioral geneticist Robert Plowman says, they predict tendencies, not outcomes. And so we have tendencies, and these tendencies are unique to who we are. And they're also where our gifts come from, as well as the burdens that we might carry. But the value really comes in how we interpret them, right? I can tell you what's good and bad, but it doesn't really mean anything because I just made it up. And that's why I don't love psychiatry, because all they do is make up diagnostic structures with no scientific validity to them. And they just say, you've got, in the 80s, you've got homosexuality disorder. But now that the culture's changed, it's not a disorder. So it's totally
right.
So what we believe is that the value is what you and your soul make of it. And it's about functionality. It's not functional for me to be depressed when my wife is bedbound. There's no way for me to thrive. So for me,
you got a lot of spinning plates.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we really believe it is what it is. It's what we do with it that matters. And we honor that each human being is unique. That's why in my private practice, a client comes in, the first thing we do, we don't start with assumptions. Models that start with a framework bother me, because I mean like a framework to fit you into, not a framework to discover you. That's fine. But a framework of, these are the options. You're either a number 9 or you're a number 7 or whatever, or here's the different parts. That's such a broken way to treat a person, because then they got to cram themselves into your suit. And the better way to treat them is inductively. You listen, you have a set of skills, you tease it apart, and then you start directing a process of facilitation so that they can hear themselves talk and talk to themselves and see what they're doing and who they are. And then they're the one who gets to own the responsibility.
I love that you also invite people in, friends, clients, to be all those, right? Because when you're going through all those things, I am the saboteur. I do have feelings of inadequacy.
Yes.
I am a scientist trying to push the envelope for discovery of human illnesses get eradicated. I am an athlete. I am a fighter. I am a lover.
Nailed it.
I'm a hater sometimes, know. And and when those are all going at once, sometimes it can be a minefield for learning how to find symphony, to find functionality, love, caring, execution, and like you said, fulfill your daily duties. I mean, there's a pragmatism to your life that I witness with all my patients.
Yeah.
There is stuff that needs to get done every day, or the consequences are dire. And if you have too long and strong of a moment of depression, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's just so amazing that you shared with our audience basically that you have a choice. And I would love for our listeners on the pod for you to just define what's like your elevator speech on agency.
Yeah, it's really that line that it is what it is, and it's what you do with it that matters. And that what that line does, if you just really unpack it, is first it shows that you are where you are right now. If you were being a jerk 2 minutes ago, or if you were depressed 2 minutes ago, or you had a migraine headache right now, you got a migraine headache, whatever, you are where you are right now. So you can think about, I wish I shouldn't have said that, blah, blah, or whatever, or dang, it sucks that I have this migraine headache. And so if we can get to the point where we say, okay, this is happening, how do I respond? Then you're tapping agency right away. If you're in a story about this is happening and this is what it means, and mom did this to me, and then my brother said this, and then this happened to me, and that's why I'm so messed up, you're in a low agency mindset. And what that's going to do is that's going to add to any inflammatory activity that's already going on in your body, first of all. And then second of all, it's going to continue to perpetuate itself in a cycle of continued low agency. So the best thing we can do is drop into a sense of choice. But we have to be aware of who we are first and what our choices are. And you touched on something important. We just look at who we are for who we are, not judge it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's like, okay, I have a saboteur, right? So for me, I have a black hole. I call it a black hole, and it can just grab me and it gets into this very hateful, like angry, resentful place. Okay, so okay, that's happening. Okay, so I can judge it, be like, oh, what a bad person am I? And then now all of a sudden I'm in another voice inside judging the fact that I've got this voice, right? So the first step is, this is what's happening. What do I want to do with it? Okay. Do I want to coddle it and tell it it's okay to do that to me? No. So I have clients ask me, well, don't you want to just accept everything? Like, okay, you tell me if someone's trying to break in your house, you want to welcome them in and say, hi, how are you? So I say, if you're someone who's wanting to commit suicide and you tell me, I really should have compassion to the part that wants to kill me, I'm going to say, really? We can accept that part exists, but do we really want to enable it?
Right.
And so just like we wouldn't enable another person if we're functioning well, we also have to learn, if we're being psychologically functional, how to have boundaries with ourselves. And that's the key to agency, is you know what you want to say no to, and you know what you want to say yes to. As soon as you've got that, and that's an ongoing process that I still deal with. So
let me give you a real tangible one.
Yeah, please.
You're 23 and your girlfriend says, why didn't you call me earlier? Right. And what does a person with agency say to that?
Well, it depends on the context, but I would say you just be authentic. Authenticity and agency go hand in hand.
Boom.
Like you could say literally, I didn't feel like calling you.
Yeah.
And that's honest. And if you were, I was at a hockey game, that's fine too. But the point is that you don't need to make a story up.
Yeah.
When you go to a story, you're in low agency, and we know about stories from colostomy studies where they split the corpus callosum, and we find really interesting things like where you split the visual field, right? You've got the brain's cross-wired so that the left hemisphere is connected to the right the right eye, and the left hemisphere is connected to the right eye. So because you have that cross visual, when the corpus callosum is split, you can split the visual field, and you can ask questions to different parts of the brain, and you can initiate you can initiate actions to different parts of the brain. So I can split your visual field, and I can tell your right hemisphere, pick up this glass of water, pick up this tea, or scratch your back, right? Just do it, and then I can go to the other side and say, why do you do that? And it'll make up a reason. And they've shown this in studies reliably. And so we have this storytelling part of our brain.
It doesn't say because the research scientist asked me to scratch my back.
It'll say, because I was itchy, or it'll say because I thought, I'm really thirsty, or I thought this glass looked cool, or it'll come up with a story of why I did it. Wow. And so we have to understand as human beings that we are storytelling machines. And if we can get that breakthrough, then we can stop listening so much. But if we're really buying the stories, it's like we're dead in the water, because that's one of the most obstructive things to good therapy, is that, somebody just wants to tell a
listening
story
so much to our own stories.
To the stories that we tell about why we do something.
Yeah.
That's a state of low agency. When you can get into, I felt like it, I wanted to, I love this, whatever, then you're more authentic. But if you're in excuse making, I did it because I got angry because you hurt my feelings yesterday, I got sad because this happened. I mean, it's all about being authentic at the end of the day. And if we can be authentic with who we are, we won't need to tell as many stories. And when we do catch ourselves telling stories, we can just laugh and just say, okay, there I go.
Don't you think that ties into people pleasing and feelings of inadequacy? Ultimately, the storytelling.
It's more complex than that. It's wired into. So some people have pleasers and some people don't have pleasers. Some people have feelings of inadequacy more than others. But everybody tends to be vulnerable to the storytelling part of the human species. Yeah. So you could be somebody who's very violent and homicidal and not so much suicidal. So most of your energy goes out towards others. And in that case, you're not somebody who necessarily feels the inadequacy, but you feel the anger much more. And a lot of people mistake that anger is not always from inadequacy. Sometimes aggression comes from different genetic places within us that get triggered. And it's not as black and white as I got traumatized and that's why I did this. There's a lot more to human behavior than that story. That's a part of our human story, is that when we get traumatized.
I mean, and like you were saying earlier, I would classify myself as a man of God and science, and I think that's kind of like soul, and I almost think science gives you opportunities to try and figure out the soul, but there's also crazy stories. Like I remember we had a neighborhood kid who I was relieved I could finally get some time, was trying to get tomatoes or something in the garden, and I turn around and I just get this bad spidey sense feeling as a dad. The kids got my son in a cardboard box, and my son's like 7, and he's about to spray WD-40 into the box, right? Total interesting neighborhood kid. Falls off a balance beam. Turns out he's got a tumor pressing on one of the aggression centers of his brain. And I was just like, okay, it's not okay to WD-40 and gas my son in a box, but this kid's got tumors that are telling him to do violent things.
Yeah, and that's well supported by literature that when we have brain injuries, that it can lead to heightened aggression, especially if you already have genetic predispositions to heightened aggression. And so there's a book called The Anatomy of Violence by Adrian Raine, where he unpacks some of these issues. He looks at the genetics, he looks at brain injury, he looks at birth complications and abuse, and also, so there's multiple factors. And that's the one thing I would want people to take away to know about personality, is there are multiple factors that release certain proclivities. And that those proclivities in and of themselves are proactive. Just like when you watch certain single cell organisms under a microscope, you see movement. With life, you see direction. And so even the subsystems in our own body have proactive direction and function, as you very well know. And so when we look at these systems, these motivational systems, these subpersonalities, they are directive. And so if you put a person in an environment where they are attracted to certain parts of that environment because of aspects of who they are, then that's going to be fed. So if you put a violent person in a violent environment, then the violence is going to be fed. But if you take that person and you put them in a different environment, the violence might not get as strong. So we understand that there's a complex, multifaceted interaction between nature and nurture at all levels of our biology that affect our personality. But we first always make sure people know that there's the genetic piece, that there is really no one like you. And if you can accept that, that's actually quite a joy, because it's freeing. There's no comparisons. The comparisons don't have any meaning. You couldn't do it like someone else if you wanted to. You could only do it like you can do it. And the more that we feel empowered in our own agency within our own personality, the more freeing our life is. So what we love about our model, and the way that I've worked this whole situation with my wife being bedbound going on 3 years now and making great progress because of your healthcare, by the way, that was a big part of the presentation as well. but it's about awareness and choice. And if I didn't have the mentoring, it's not like I just did it all alone. I had people training me for a decade to help me learn who I am, because I was being trained to be a good psychologist to help other people learn who they are. And so by the time I got smacked in the face with a crisis and I had to face the grief of my wife being bedbound and dealing with things that we didn't know what they were for a long time, and watching her slip away and start dying right in front of me, I knew who I was at that point. So I knew that when I started making, I'm never going to be okay, and this is awful, and I'm not doing a good enough job, and then the loneliness too. On top of that, the romantic part of me that wants connection and love was totally has been isolated in a lot of ways, and luckily I'm getting more and more connection with her now. But imagine if I didn't know who I was, and that was just all crammed into a single voice.
Yeah.
But now that I have differentiation, I can see, okay, that's exactly what that part of me would say in a situation like this. Oh, I'm pissed off. I've got a challenger in me, and he can go from 0 to 1,000. I've worked really hard on my anger for the last 15 years, and I've got it under much better control. Now I could just be an a-hole sometimes, but it's not nearly. I'm always going to be a little bit of an a-hole. That's just the way it is. But but it's not nearly as controlling as it used to be. And so I'm aware of that. Like when I start getting angry, I'm aware. Okay, I've got this guy inside, and I can make a story. I'm angry because my wife's in bed, but that's really BS. I'm angry because I got an opportunity now to be angry, and that's part of who I am. And he's directional. So all the parts of us are proactive, not just reactive. We proactively seek to we create our lives. That's why self-responsibility is number one. So when a client comes in, it's like, okay, so what's going on? And then are you willing to take responsibility for how these different parts of you created this? That's number one. If you're not willing to do that, then there's nothing to be done.
Wow.
So to me, every day is another day to take responsibility. So when I start getting depressed or getting irritable, or I've got exposure going on with a leaky window, and I'm trying to manage 24/7 healthcare, and I've got short-staffed caregiving, and I'm also trying to launch my career, revive my career as a young PhD, and I'm really excited about that. Now I'm frustrated and feeling stunted, and then I'm also faced with the fact that we're still here. And I've got my own SIRS, and I'm dealing with inflammation too. And so you can see how that can spiral. And so I go, like when I manage the caregivers, my goal is to be a loving person. And when I when I fall on my face, I just say, yeah, that was my bad, and I'm taking responsibility for how I lost it there for a second. So
well, I think how our team feels about you. I know I tagged along a lot with your wife's care, but it's Dr. Bierke who really took the lead on the front end.
Oh, she deserves. Can I just jump in there?
Yes.
I think that it's easy when you're here because you did the spearhead of getting Victoria in the door. Yeah. And but when I say you, like I'm talking about her too. When I say roots and branches, she was there. I could cry. Dr. Bierke, her level of compassion and patience and understanding, and every time she would just be so validating towards me, and she would give me, she's just my hero. I tell her all the time she's my hero, and that's one of the main things that I would want her to know is
right on.
She really helped save Victoria's life. So yeah. And
I believe you. That's an extreme healthcare situation, and I think one of the reasons we all love you, but our staff down to Britannia and Dana and me and the whole crew is there's so many people that bounce in your situation, and I don't blame them. I don't have any I get it, right? But when we said at the conference, we want to clone you as a husband bot, it's because I was in the heaviest of storm, the craziest tornado. You just stood your ground and you said, I'm going to take responsibility for my part in this, in all these contracts, in the marital contract, in the contract to your moral compass, in the contract to the love and patience your parents poured into you when you were being a dipshit punk rock, just self-absorbed addict, which is again in all of us. But when that gets too strong, you're dysfunctional as a human being, right? And I think we all are just inspired by someone who really came in the gnarliest dregs of chronic illness and said, I have a choice to show up in this, right? And I'm not going to be victimized by this. And I think even though every single provider at Roots and Branches, we're so blessed with people who give a shit, it's still, even if you try and give this neutral, everyone gets the compassion, when you see that effort, when you see that leadership, it inevitably boomerangs back and inspires you more as a provider. And it's a refreshing breath of fresh air. And I think about what you're trying to do with the human soul and the spirit and how that reverberates. There's a ripple to that. Right? Yeah. Everyone 100%. Gets to ride a piece of that wave with neutrality. I mean, no one's trying to take anything from you. Everyone's getting uplifted, and then they're serving you and your situation stronger. And instead of society going in this downward, anxious, victimized spiral, we're going up, becoming humanity again, finding our agency, taking care of each other. Yeah. Right? Getting inspired by each other. Yeah. And realizing this is the craziest ass situation to be a young couple with my wife bedbound, with not having emotional intimacy and more, and having another leak in our house, and you got a choice. Yeah. Okay, now I'm believing it. Now I'm like, all right, if that guy's doing it, right, who am I to not make better decisions for my behaviors?
It's hard work is what I think people need to know, is that it's doing rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty, and going through the feelings you don't want to feel and dealing with them and cleaning them out so that I can show up with responsibility and choice. Because those are my choices. I can make excuses and lash out, and I can give in to the parts of me that would go into destruction, or I can show up and be loving. And Victoria deserves a lot of credit for that. If I didn't love her, none of this would be possible. I couldn't do what I did without love. Love is magic. Love is the love is the most important part of all this. If you love somebody or something, if you love God, if you love your wife, if you love your kids, you'll do anything. You'll do it. Yep. It's not about you. It's not about how it feels. It's not about how hard it is. It's just like pure. It's just giving.
But what's super important, at least my perspective on this, that I learned from you. Yeah. Is love is developed.
Absolutely.
It's not something you just are born with this capacity for. I think the divine gives us the innate capacity for it. Yeah. But you still have to train it. Like you 100%, train jiu-jitsu, or you train for a marathon, or you train to become a better business owner that gets your taxes on time this year. You have to do your reps.
100%.
And the thing that struck me about your story is I heard a sermon one time where a pastor is this black guy in this Baptist church, and he preached for like 3 hours, and it was so potent, but at like 2.5 hours, like my butt's hurt, I'm hypoglycemic, I'm ready. And he just kept going. And it was about preparation. It was about being prepared to serve. So when your neighbor hurts himself and needs you to bring them soup, are you ready to do that? Or is your life such a mess that there's no agency to help out another being? And it's like, I didn't realize the development that you put in at such a young age.
We talked about the 10 plus years and you're absolutely right. I did not get here alone. So that's why when people try to come up and give me all the credit, I said, well, the only credit I get is I showed up and I did the work. Yeah. And I've got the gifts I've got, and you've got the gift. We've all got the gifts we've got. We've all got the crosses that we have to carry. That's just being human. So I'm blessed. Dr. Strachan's a therapeutic genius. I mean,
91 years old, pours into you and says, I trust you to take over my life's work.
Eric, I've spent thousands of hours talking to this guy. You know who I was calling when the depression was taking hold? And you know what he would say? I don't want to listen to that part of you. I want to talk to someone else. Talk about tough love. this is how I came up in this stuff. So we worked through my parts, and I came to the conclusion that this woman is what I'm devoted to, and that's the way it is. So I can bitch and moan about it, or I can get on with it and love her.
And you probably need to bitch and moan once in a blue moon, right? Like it's that.
I have my venting sessions.
It's that 10%.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But 10% is never gonna swallow the other 90%.
What I believe is that connection and validation.
Yeah.
It's important. I don't believe in just venting just to vent.
Yeah.
But I believe in somebody's listening and hearing, wow, you really have been through a lot.
Yeah.
And look at what you're doing, and that's just a big load to carry. And I believe in that sort of level. The level that doesn't work is the level of perpetual feeding of the destructive parts, because even from a neurological perspective, we know that if you don't stop the runaway train, it's trouble.
Right. The rut gets deeper.
We got to do stop mechanisms. That's number one, is stop, redirect, rewire over and over again, 1,000 times a day if you have to. And then, then you got to have friends and family and loved ones who can help you tell the difference between and reflect to you the difference between when you're just complaining and digging yourself deeper and when you're just actually grieving and you just need to be heard and need to not be the guy who's carrying everything for a few minutes.
But when your mentor would say those things to you, or when a family member or a trusted friend talks to you about, like, hey bro, it's spiraling out, like you're being a victim, right? These are people who can be truthful because they've brought grace and love and trust, right? They're not, these are people that have your back.
The rapport is there.
The rapport is there, thank you, the foundation.
Yeah.
So during the conference, you talked about the difference between, most of us have had an experience where we've been victimized, but that's different than victimization.
There's a difference between being victimized and identifying as a victim. There are a lot of people who have the natural predisposition to victimhood, and then they do get victimized. And then that reinforces the predisposition to victimhood. And that can be really difficult, because then you've got a part of you that identifies as somebody who's a victim, that this is what's happened, life happens to me and it's not fair. And then you've got actual data to back it up. And that's really hard on people. So the big thing is to help people separate that. And if you come in to work with me and you want to be a victim and there's no other part of you that wants to change that, it's not going to work, because I do high agency work. So it's the opposite of a victim. However, if you will come in and you identify that, okay, I've got a part of me, and I help people identify this, that sees myself as a victim and tells all the stories of victimhood. And I would if I could, but I can't and it's your fault. Because a lot of times victims go from victim to persecutor in a millisecond, just to keep, because you gotta have the tension to keep the victim going. So you gotta throw out.
That sounds exhausting.
Yeah, exactly. So they identify, and if they have other parts of, that's why the parts model is so important, that we use different subpersonalities and a soul. If your soul's like, I don't want to do that, then you've got an authority within, or other parts that are sticking up for a different way. And then we can do the validation work and the grieving work of, you were victimized, and here's how you grieve without identifying as a victim. Here's how you heal without identifying as a victim. Here's how you get the process done that you need to go through without going down the road of poor me. And that's huge. And a lot of people don't like hearing that, because it triggers the part of them that's a victim. And it's triggering. It's totally triggering. It's just like an alcoholic. You tell him he's got a drinking problem. It's like, it's triggering. So we often don't want to hear the things that we're committed to doing. And it's important that when you work with somebody like a good therapist, that, they're going to tell you stuff, just what they're, call it like they see it, with love. And you said something really important earlier, that you got to develop the love, and there is no shame in having just a little spark that you got to develop.
Right. There's something inherent in us, but it needs training. It needs polishing.
And you don't want to beat yourself up for needing to grow. Ever. You don't want to compare yourself, like, look how this guy is doing this, and look, I can barely take out the trash without getting pissed off, or whatever it is. So,
but at the same time, it's good to be in loving competition with oneself and saying, like, hey, 50 now. Are we overdoing that to ourselves? like, right? Like I always say, our three spiritual swords of healing at roots and branches are gratitude, forgiveness, and humor. Right. And it's like, we're grateful that we get to help people and invite them into exploring obstacles to cure. We realize that if you don't understand that love is a verb and forgiveness is an action, and your most complicated relationships, I'm thinking of a narcissistic personality disorder relative right now, right? One of my greatest teachers to say, are you really down with forgiveness? Or do you forgive when someone finally apologized for something and in the court of law, they have cleared their name, right? Forgiveness is someone who doesn't deserve necessarily
absolutely
that.
Well, I think even more than that, forgiveness is it's not my responsibility whether or not they deserve it. I'm choosing to let go. For me at least, because if part of it is that we let go of being the judge, and it's their journey and they did what they did, and I'm letting it go. And that to me is how I interpret, when Jesus' teachings of forgiveness.
Totally.
To me, that's what he means. He's like, you're not God. You're not the judge of right and wrong. Like you're just a human. It's like what he says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. It's like, that's a line.
I got a pocket full of rocks.
I'm going to shut my mouth.
Well, and I think that's the key though, is that, or you can hold that lowercase r righteousness and suffer holding court.
You nailed it.
Right?
Lowercase r righteousness.
Lowercase r righteousness and hold court and hold the burden of that. Right.
Exactly.
And what's crazy in the Chinese medical model, each organ system has a correlation, emotional correlation, and the lungs house grief. And they all have an opposite correlation. The opposite is the inspiration of celestial chi. It's literally breathe in the divine, breathe out the grief and the heaviness. And the paired organ with the lungs is the large intestine. And the large intestine is about letting go.
It's amazing.
It's incredible. When I was a resident, we had a woman who got molested supposedly by devil worshippers. This is the craziest story I've ever heard. I tell you, I visited after the 6th time of cross-examining her, just politely, like trying to catch her in like, this has got to be some kind of punk. I'm getting punked. like seriously, I'm a new resident. Whatever happened, it was dark. And super, super dark. She's the most constipated patient I had ever seen in 30 years of healthcare. She would have a poop every 3 weeks. And she thought that was normal. And I was like, well, let's start with once a week. And let's try and go to once every 3 days. Nothing worked. Nothing. Aloe, colonics, the hardest thing. And I'm not a homeopath. But I remember I took 1,200 hours of homeopathy and I had to take my boards on it. And there are grief remedies. And one of them is homeopathic salt. It's called nature muriaticum, literally salt, sodium. And it's a huge grief remedy. And I gave her the highest dose, 1 and she went and filled the bowl. And it was so crazy, but the energetics of grief, such disappointment, such shame, such sadness, and the inability to let go, that this happened to me and I am pissed about it. And she had every right in the court of human law to be pissed about it. But it was ruining her life to not let that go.
So there we have agency. Big time is, once you get that spark, where you have the opportunity to think, oh, is this what letting go feels like?
Yeah.
That's your start. And talk about holding on and feeling grief, chronic illness.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people feel isolated and burdened and totally thrashed by the unfair whims of health issues? Totally. There's no sense to it. It just seems so senseless sometimes when you're like, really? Like I'm dealing with this and I don't have nearly the story Victoria has. I mean, we haven't told much of her story today, but with her being bedbound, I can't imagine being in bed for almost 3 years.
Not at
the
her
amount
age.
of Yeah, 33.
I volunteering hospice, I think about some 82-year-old with liver cancer metastasized to the bone or something. That's like kind of how what she's working through psychologically.
Yeah. Yeah. And Victoria's my model because I watched her choose life. You know, when you came in to see her with Dr. Bierke and you both did your evaluation and you couldn't even really talk to her because she was so incapacitated and just wasn't engaged in anything. It was just severe mitochondrial dysfunction. She was dying, and then I watched her slowly through the work that she did inside, alongside the treatment that Roots and Branches was giving her, slowly choose to live. And then later I'd validate it because we weren't talking a lot at that time. Later she would tell me, I'm doing all sorts of things in my imagination. I'm going shopping, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I'm like, this woman's got agency inside. So, you know, if you're listening to this podcast and you think that you can't have agency, like, there's no way, if you're still breathing, you've got an opportunity to have agency. If you're still breathing, if you're still here, there's always agency, even if it's just what you're doing inside yourself. And that's so inspirational to me. That's why she's still here.
I literally just thought agency is humanity. Like
yes.
She's restored her humanity.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. Not this brilliant, but it's really like yes, that was, you know, once in a while you just say you got to do home visit as a doctor. You just gotta, you know, you're called. It's like something taps you on the shoulder and says, it's time. Yeah. And the other thing that happened, just for our listeners, is she has such light sensitivity. We never met her, like not even on a telehealth, right? So we were just excited to meet her.
Yeah, we used to joke that I was just making her up.
Well, and then Dr. Bierke was telling me that, and I was like, you know, Ryan seems pretty normal, but I did see Fight Club, and you never know. I would like to see this Victoria, you know.
Exactly.
And the setup was as we kind of expected, but it's still shocking to see someone young who, when you took us through the talk at CERS-X, to see like this life you guys have, and you still have it in you're planting seeds again, right? But it's like there's pictures of you camping, and there's pictures of you at concerts, and there's pictures of you hanging out, and, you know, being lovey-dovey, and it's heavy duty to see a young person go through that.
You know, it's been so surreal, and the last few years have been almost like a weird time warp in a way. So I was listening to someone's podcast that does CERS work. I think it's Melanie. Yeah. And she said it's like, sometimes it's like CERS is like Groundhog Day. Yeah. But then like multiply that when you're dealing with a woman who's in a dark room 24/7. That's why I encourage people to go look up pictures of people with severe ME/CFS.
Yeah.
And you will see the eye cover, the noise canceling headphones over and over and over again, just totally incapacitated.
Yep.
And like I said at the conference, most of these people don't even know that CERS exists or that they might have it.
Right.
And that might be part of the reason why this is happening. And you could speak to that better than me. But anyways, my point is that, so you're in a dark room 24/7, and then I'm going in, I'm now a nurse. For all intents and purposes, you know, not really, but I'm running infusions through a central power port. There's a woman named Stephanie Testerman who has Victoria would also not be alive without Stephanie. She pulled through to get that surgery done because Victoria was not drinking enough fluids. So we got a central power port so we could do saline without having to jabber every single day. And then we have, of course, Aaron Livers hooking us up with the shakes.
Amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going in there every day in the pitch black with a little flashlight, and I'm hooking up infusions, and I'm not even talking to her.
Yeah.
At the worst of it. So for me,
heavy.
It's not just the spiritual darkness. It was also the physical darkness that was mirroring it. Yeah. It's just a dark situation.
Yeah.
And then when you came in and said, okay, well, here's the shoemaker protocol. Your wife's got SIRS, and here's what we need you to do. Okay, I was already burnt out at that point. So I'm like, what? I gotta clean. I gotta get all of this stuff out of the house. I gotta do this. I gotta do that. I'm taking care of my wife at the same time, and it was crazy. But we pushed through agency, and she started rebounding.
Yeah.
And so I said at the talk, I didn't have control over results. I had to get to the point, and Roger on the phone said, you have to accept the fact she might die. Otherwise you're just going to be miserable. If you can't show up and just love her without controlling the outcome, this is going to be a miserable experience. If you can show up and give the gift of love without needing to know how it's going to go, then you're cooking. And he really helped me get into that place of love. So that's what I strive to do, is like, how can I get back into that place of love? And when I notice during the day, if I start falling out of that place, I just try to do the work to get back in.
You know, the other person I want to give a quick shout out to is you have a special friendship with John Banta.
I love John.
Yeah, he definitely was helping us through the minutia. And your building got to a good place.
Yeah.
But I was talking earlier before we were about to do the pod and saying, like, so many people go, look at me, I'm through rehab, right? I got a hair transplant, I got tan, I'm through rehab, I'm working out, and now they talk about their story, right? What I love is that you're still in it and you're displaying agency, you're being honest that it's not perfect, but it's a life worth living. And you had a window leak 3 days before you're supposed to come down to Arizona and speak at SIRS-X.
Yeah.
While you're leaving your wife behind for the first time, you probably left the house and had a professional experience, right? Like, you're a freaking PhD therapist who's doing incredible work, who's inherited a 91-year-old wizard's legacy.
That's a good way to explain them, actually.
And what a professional ride. Like, my hair rolls because I am so privileged to get to do the work I do, right? Yeah. You know, and I remember listening to a podcast once and the grandma said, whatever you do, be a good one. You know, and it's like, garbage man, great. Pick up garbage well. Take pride in it. Find agency, you know. But you have a magical professional path. But you haven't gotten to really express that. We invite you to speak at SIRS-X. I get to peer review your slides. I'm like, holy cow, bring your tissue boxes. This is going to be nuts. Right. And the timing of it brought so many people's hearts to the science and the community and the buzz, and everyone was ready talking buildings and science and soul and coaches and lawyers and legal and fight for your right to heal and get a clean building for your kids to go to school, and then you just come in and go boom. And I think that you almost didn't grace us with that freaking truth bomb of a talk because you had a water intrusion 2 days before you're supposed to.
In my wife's bathroom, no less, like right next to where she's sleeping. So we're thinking this is an emergency.
So if anyone doubts if you're the real deal Holyfield brother, you are it, and you have street cred. And I think that gives insight to, hey, this is how you can be a spouse in chronic illness, because it goes well beyond SIRS, right? There's ALS, there's Parkinson's. We know some Parkinson's are SIRS, and we were talking about that. You said you can be a determinant robot. I wrote this down, or you can believe your consciousness matters.
Yeah, you can be a deterministic robot, or you can believe your consciousness matters. You got, those are your choices. You can believe that I'm just the result of whatever biochemical process is happening, and that's my mood, and that's my attitude, and I'm just riding it out. Or you can start thinking, no, I'm a part of my process, and my process is real, and I'm also real. So our consciousness. And defining consciousness as our intentionality, our perception, our feeling, our awareness, right? Our consciousness makes an incredible difference. We know this from placebo and nocebo studies. And there aren't any great theories about why those things work, but I suspect it has to do with consciousness.
Well, and I always said there's no separation between body, mind, spirit, right?
Exactly.
There's like, you do something good for one, the others benefit, right? And you're talking about agency more in the soul and the mind. And I'm also saying, and if you have DHEA sulfate, the dalbredazine levels at 350 to 430 for females, 400 to 500 for males, you're going to have more resilience. It's an anti-inflammatory, immune modulating anabolic.
Yeah.
Now I go, I am going to see a therapist.
Yeah.
Right. Then I go to someone who's not a victim miner, right? Like what I've taught, where you and I meld so well is this physiological agency, spiritual agency, psychological agency, right? But that we're both in the business of graduation, right? We're not looking for codependency, but we're also not looking for people to ever feel abandonment. The door is cracked if you need to slip in, 100%. And say hello, right? Can you tell us, in wrapping up today, what is it like to work with you? Who are you trying to focus on? Because we know you have this deep yearning to serve those with chronic illness. How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so chronic illness and caregivers is a big passion for sure. I've also worked with a lot of young people just working on finding their path and finding their vocation, finding their calling, how to function as an adult. What I really love doing is the deep soul work right now. And a great medium for that is dealing with this chronic illness and this caregiving situation. So on both ends of it, I want to touch back on what you said. We have to establish the fact that this is real and the fact that treatment needs to happen. And for some people, I've worked with somebody in the past who had Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and at the time I haven't looked at the research lately, but it's a death sentence by 33. So for that person, his agency it's like, I'm gonna enjoy the time I have instead of being pissed off about the time I don't. Like, that's a great set of agency skills right there, is just being able to look at yourself in that way. So no matter where you fall in this, whether you're terminal or whether you're in recovery, it doesn't matter where you are in the process, agency matters. Even in the last breath, agency matters. Even if you're the caregiver that's burnt out, you've been doing it for, there's some people with this ME/CFS diagnosis been in bed for 20 years and they've got long-term family caregivers, And so wherever you are on the spectrum of dealing with the burden of these chronic illness issues, and whether you're on the caregiver side or the patient side, agency matters. If you're someone like Victoria, where she was at her worst, the therapist is working with the caregiver. And the caregiver is the one who needs to stay grounded because the patient's just not even available. So for me, when somebody comes in, we establish, who are you? So we have an interview process. What are your different subpersonalities? And I'm trained to listen to that. So just even knowing you, I could break it down into a few different reflections. And then my reflections become opportunities for you to say, yeah, this resonates. Here's what I would change about that. Because really it's about you identifying through the process that we facilitate. So you're
trying to help me figure it out.
Yeah.
I want to figure it out. I want to be a fully expressed human experience. Yeah.
So who are you? And do you believe? We always ask people, do you believe you have a soul? Always. If you don't, that's okay. We'll work on the level of self. And I will say, well, are you open to the possibility of exploring that you have a soul? And if they are, then we'll explore it. And if they believe they have a soul, we say, well, are you open to the possibility that there's a spirit, there's a spiritual reality? Are you open to? Would you like that to be a part of our work? And if they want it to be a part of the work, it's part of the work. But see, we can work at self, soul, or spirit at any level or at all levels without judgment. There's nothing wrong with being 18 years old and just trying to get to college and get independent from your parents who you feel like are trying to control you all the time, and that you just want to work on self. So Ryan, I'm not here to talk about my soul. I'm here because I want a girlfriend and my parents are up my butt and I want some independence and I want to function. That's a legitimate level to work on. And then you usually, for a lot of people at some point in their life, the idea of a deeper, meaningful process becomes relevant. And that's where you're talking about soul. So we say the soul is for being and the parts are for doing. But the cool part is anything you do at any given moment is being done by a part of you. There's no behavior without these parts. So sometimes it could be the coordination of a few different aspects of who you are working together through, and also with your intelligence, because intelligence is global. So intelligence runs throughout the whole system, but then the system itself has these different value positions in it. And the different value positions can compete or cooperate or tolerate each other. So, you hear someone say, part of me feels this way, but another part of me feels this way. I really want to go play basketball, but my wife wants to go shopping with me, or she wants to go out to dinner. So it's like, okay, so what part wants to do what?
Were you spying on my house the other
day? Well, I think I was confessing, actually.
There you go.
So then you see, okay,
and I want to do both.
Yes, but then when you break it down as a part of me, part of me wants to do one, and another part of me wants to do another.
Yeah.
And so when you see that all the values are relative, then it's about the creative choices we make. That's why we call our business Center for Creative Choice. Because it's not about it's wrong to go play basketball and it's right to go do this. It's just every moment's a choice, and it's a creative choice. And at some level, you might get your soul involved with big intentional choices about your life. Like the soul is for how you live your life. It's not, Roger always says it's not for whether you get the Slurpee or the Diet Coke at the gas station. But the soul might get involved and say, that's not the type of diet that I want to eat as a lifestyle. So the soul is the overall intentional trajectory of how we live. And the parts are the minutia. The parts are the day-to-day. The parts are the podcast where you and I are talking, and we could both talk for hours because that's who we are. Yeah. There's a lot of people that could sit in front of the microphone. They have nothing to say because that's just who they are. They're not. Yeah. They don't activate in the same way you and I do. You and I love talking. So. Yeah.
So if I was going to marry Truth and Grace, would you say something like, "Hey, hun, I'm really looking forward to grabbing some dinner with you, but I really need some exercise tonight. So I'm going to play hoops with the boys. Yeah. What do you think about Friday?"
There's nothing wrong with that. And but if you both do the model we do, like we love it when couples come in together, because then you can say, hey, the athlete in me really wants to go play basketball, and let's go. Would you mind if we went on a date tomorrow? Yeah. Because then you're kind of like, this is where I am. And you're owning it. You're just owning what this is what I'm going to do.
That's cool to name that. Yeah. Actually.
It's really powerful with couples, because once then you can see also the parts that get in trouble with each other. It's like when my challenger comes out with Victoria, it doesn't go anywhere because there's no part of her that resonates with the connection of that part's anger or frustration or challenging, or I like to debate. Pick a subject, and I'll be like, let's talk about the metaphysics of the universe, or let's break down all the problems with the psychiatric model of diagnosis. Let's talk about DSM and how broken DSM is and why it's not scientific. And like, she likes to chat, but she likes to explore, but she doesn't like to debate. So if I disagree with something, my role to be a good lover is to realize, okay, my challenger is going to be dysfunctional in this situation. And so I'm going to listen and try to learn from her, and also share what I think without making it a challenge. And so that's an art that I haven't quite mastered that one yet, by the way.
That might be kind of a masculine thing too, because I'm all about like the facts and blah, and it's like, that's a good way to say it. I remember a couple once that had a very mature relationship, and she said, "I don't know why I'm just so agitated with you right now," to her husband. He said, "Well, I would be really interested to learning about that more sometime if you tap into it." And it was so like, he wasn't rattled. He didn't take it personally. He said, "You're having a tizzy and you don't know why, and I'm cool with it. Let me know when you got more info on that." And I was like, dang, that's good. 2.0 marriage right there.
That's really funny. Yeah. I love it.
So people love this level of agency, support, clarity, helping get unstuck. How do they find you?
centerforcreativechoice.com.
Okay.
There's a really simple contact us page. You can submit an inquiry. We'll get back to you within 2 business days. If you just have a question, we'll get back to you. If you want to work with us, we'll get back to you. And then our website is like really big. I mean, we've got, if you want to read, most people are like, people don't want to read these days, Ryan. Why are you making your website?
Yeah.
But I was
like, my only problem was like, dude, it's midnight. If
Yeah.
you really dive in right now, this is amazing stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm a philosopher at heart. You
Yeah.
know, I'm a psychologist. I'm a philosopher at heart.
Yeah.
And that's just who I am. So
Yeah.
it's not. I'm never satisfied just to like be like, you know, here's the premise and here's the conclusion. I want to wait. I want you to have the full argument. Why we believe what we believe. How the self is integrated with the soul and the spirit. How the science is integrated with the spirituality. So if you want to learn a lot, you can read the website. But if you just want to get in touch and do some work, and you know, you can skim the website. But yeah, I laugh at myself because most people's websites don't involve a book. You know?
Yeah, totally. And I love that it's different personalities and you know how to get in there because you have that overall inquisitive soul that just really wants to help somebody get to a better quality of life.
And seriously, all credit to Dr. Strachan.
Yeah.
I mean, could you just imagine at 20 or so years old meeting a guy who's been a clinical, you know, wizard, like you said, for 60 years.
No doubt.
And he's so, I mean, I'll just tell you a quick story and then we can wrap up or go wherever you want. But he would get hired to go into different facilities. So he went into one facility and there was a guy who was a catatonic schizophrenic. So he was just sitting there doing nothing all the time. Roger's so brilliant. He looks at the guy, he observes him for a day or so. He says, okay. He goes to the nurses, he says, here's what I want you to do. And catatonic schizophrenic means you don't talk, by the way, for those who don't know. Here's what I want you to do. When you're spoon feeding him, don't talk, don't move. He doesn't talk, he doesn't move. When you're spoon feeding him, I want you to get distracted and talk to each other and just kind of miss his mouth a little bit. And you just, you know, the food will kind of spill aside. Just keep talking and laughing. And so they did it for a few meals and he was fuming. And eventually he broke out. He said, give me that effing spoon. I'll do it myself. He started feeding himself.
Wow.
So why did Roger know that? That's the question. Because he understands that the parts of us have these deep dynamics. And he saw this guy and he knew it was all about power and control. He knew that the not moving and the not eating was a power and control move. And he set up an intervention so that the whole thing would explode. Now, what he does with that when it explodes, that's up to the guy.
Yeah.
Roger's done that to me. I was never catatonic schizophrenic, but he puts you in situations where, you know, you're like, whoa. And you're just like, okay, now this is my stuff that's right here.
He gets in touch with the truth.
He gets you in touch with the truth. Yeah. So, you know, the guy has blessed me and I really wouldn't have been able to be as strong for Victoria without him. And Victoria's lovely. I mean, she's not hard to love. And so that's another win on my end. So, I mean, I've just showing up and loving the woman I love and taking advantage of the training I have. And, you know, I just believe every day we have a choice to do the work. And, you know, when we fall and we slip or we get frustrated or we go back to the self-destructive or the other destructive parts, then it's a choice to come back. Progress, not perfection. That's how I got sober.
One more time on your website.
Center for Creative Choice. You can just go to contact us. If you want to learn about our chronic illness services, go to Center for Creative Choice /CLRS. Super easy. Just go to the contact us page and we'll get in touch.
And I want to just remind everyone, don't forget to get some support if you're a caregiver. And you guys crush that. And you have permission to go get support if you are a caregiver.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. And actually like reconnecting with your own values and, you know, the parts of you that you've had to sacrifice because of the care.
Yeah.
And learning how to take care of yourself and give yourself some time.
Right on, brother.
Yeah.
Loving it.
Thanks for having me.
Yep. Cheers.
Appreciate you. Cheers.